Good day, everybody. Welcome to What is the Positive? And we're going to be discussing that in extent with four of us here in the green room. We only have three right now, but there will be four, and you never know, possibly more. But to start this off, I will say, well, first of all, I'm Roland Takaoka. What is the Positives is the name of the show. I'm Roland from R&D Hotline, and I love doing this show. So I'm dishing all the internet marketing and all the other ideas that I have on my mind, and we're just going to plow into the concepts of the psychology of positive thinking, or the science of positive thinking, or just positive psychology, whatever you want to call it. It's all linked together because it's all part of the thinking process of mankind. But we're not all just positive. There is also the opposite pole of negativity. So you've got positive pole and negative pole. And I'm proposing that if we focus on positivity, we polarize positively in a vein that can change our lives. So I don't care what's going on with you. I don't care what's going on with me. We can fix it by being positive and walking the positive direction. We can say hi to Gary Wayland, who's peeping out in the comment stream there. Kathy Pop is also there. A few people in our green room, and we'll be saying hi to the people as they come and go. Velin Hawkins wanted to be here today, but I messed her up with the scheduling. So we're left with the people that are joining me in the green room, and we want to introduce them now. So let's start off by introducing Carlos Savio. Say hi and tell people where you're coming from.
Okay, I'm Carlos Aveo. I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada. Professionally, business-wise, I'm a small business management and financial consultant, uh, digitally fluent, a self-taught web engineer, proficient in half a dozen programming languages, and been accessing the internet daily, almost daily since 1992. As relates to what is the positive, I have a self-taught background in monotheism and polytheism, uh, in the study of ancient Asian religions, those that originated 5,000 years ago, which I found really interesting. That's about it.
Wow. And when I said tell us where you're coming from, I was speaking of etherically, actually. So no, I'm just kidding. So, thank you for giving us a little bit of your background. And George, why don't you tell us who you are and where you're coming from? And you can
Okay.
take that any way you want.
Really? Oh, free scope, carte blanche, marvelous. Um, George Mycroft. I'm basically, I think we said last week, a world traveler, a life traveler. I've been around the globe more times than I care to admit, both on ships and working in different countries. My background is seafaring, marine, oil industry. And now I'm involved in a completely different life, basically relating back to spirituality and energy, I guess you would call it, which was where I ran away to sea from because it didn't seem to fit in with life. And so they say you come back full circle. Here I am with galoshes on, trying to keep out of the mud.
Very good. And it's actually a good thing to keep out of the mud. Um, you have to dig that stuff out of your shoes when it dries. It's a real pain in the butt. But anyway, we will be joined by a fourth person here in the green room. But I'm glad that we're being joined out with the audience, and your people are happy to comment and tell us where you're coming from, and comment on whatever's going on in the green room. We're promising to have an interesting conversation today, in spite of my slurring and stuttering and whatever I do. So, what is the positive? Is the general concept and the title of this Hangout series, and the title for today, in particular, is When Guilt Serves No Purpose. So we'll dig into that deeply in a moment. But I just wanted to say to you some of the things that we're going to be speaking of and talking about. Oh, we're joined by Shira. So I'm going to hold off what I was going to say, and we're going to say hi to Shira Hunt. Hi, Shira. Oops, your microphone's muted, and we don't have any sound, so let's try again. Well, it may be that you'll have to step out and step back in. Let me double check something before you do that. No, it looks like you're on if you're on. So it could be that if we have no sound, we'll have to have you step out and step back in because there's a connectivity problem, which happens in Hangouts very often. So sorry about that one. So she'll be doing the cycle job there with the step out, step in. And in the meantime, what I was going to be saying about what is the positive of the concept, some of the things we'll be discussing in the future are the concept of reactivity versus intentional thought. Reactivity versus intentional thought, or responding concept. So,
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Cheryl, we can hear you loud and clear, and we're presenting everybody to our crowd of people that we have listening. So why don't you just, for the record, tell everybody a brief synopsis of who you are and where you're coming from.
Okay, I'm Shira Hunt. I'm a vibrational medicine teacher and therapist. I use frequency and sound in treatment. I'm from Las Casas, Tennessee right now. I don't know how long that's going to last, but that's where I am at the moment. And I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yes, we're excited to have you too. And as the conversation progresses, those listening outside of the green room, it'll become obvious why they're in the green room with me. And the conversation was really, really intense last week, covered a lot of ground, and filled every single second except for a couple of dull second moments. But I mean, it was just such a full conversation, and that's because the brains in the room right now are really, really active. And that's based on personal experience and studying and education and just who they are. That's just a perspective. Sometimes a person can know a lot but understand very little. So this is not the case with this crowd, and that's why I've selected them for the green room. So I wanted to fall back on what this show as a series is all about, and I was mentioning that we eventually are going to cover the concept of reactivity versus intentional thought. And people will say, what are you talking about? Well, there's reactivity and responsiveness, and so that's the little clue for the future. We also are going to ask things like, what is being present? What is being present? And here's another one. What is mindfulness? So we're going to cover the conversation will include a formal definition or an experiment regarding what we think that mindfulness is or being present is, but we are also going to dig in and have a conversation about what we perceive it really is. However, today the subject is guilt. Now, I'm going to start this off myself because I have a theory. And I live by this theory, and I apply it to everything I do, and virtually it sets me free from a lot of stuff. Okay, and I will be extrapolating out the conversation. I'll explain that more and more. But the concept in the title of the show is when guilt serves no purpose. And I will say right up in the front, guilt, other than the fact that it helps you address what you didn't desire, was opposite, the outcome of what you experienced was opposite of the desire you had. Once you realize that, guilt serves absolutely no purpose, ever. Okay, so now you can think to yourself, well, no, we use guilt right here, and I sense it in my experience. I don't care what you say, guilt serves no purpose. And there is an alternate way of thinking because we all want to evolve past the guilt onto bigger and better things. So what is your initial response to that? Anybody?
I'm glad I agree with you.
Otherwise, this would be a different kind of conversation.
Because it's like there's any room to not agree with you. So ultimately, I kind of agree also with Panache Desai, who says that guilt is not even a real emotion. It's just something that we as human beings made up so we could use it on people, and
ourselves.
Yeah, and ourselves, and usually that's the worst. But we don't always see it so clearly when we're doing it to ourselves. But it's real clear when we're doing it to somebody else. But yeah, I agree with you that it really doesn't serve a purpose. I think there are many other emotions we could have besides guilt that would bring us to that conclusion that you said. I picked something I didn't really want, but ultimately it's painful. It's I see that as one of the nastiest things we can do to a person, and ultimately it starts very, very young in our culture, that we are guilted by the things that we do wrong. And our parents unknowingly a lot of times, I don't think it's intentional a lot of the time, but will lay the guilt on us to keep us from doing it again. And then when we realize that we're to blame and we're guilty, we cultivate that process as we grow. It gets into the subconscious. It becomes one of the ways we regulate ourselves, and then we use it to beat on ourselves as we progress in our own lives.
Sure, the concept of guilt and punishment, and wrapped up into finding fault, guilt, punishment, and shame is kind of wrapped up into this bottle of being a real thing in all of our existence. It has a shape and a size, and it has a place in our lives which becomes as real as anything else, and it's hard to dodge. It governs a lot of what we do. So what
Hey,
do you
Roland.
think, George?
Yeah, there's one thing that just suddenly popped into my memory. I remember hearing years ago that in life there are guilt throwers and guilt catchers. And one of the ways, if you find yourself somebody trying to lay guilt on you, is because a lot of it's done not in a conscious way. It's just a pattern that we've learned to relate with people. And one of the ways to bring people into consciousness about what they're doing is to ask them the question, "You're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you?" "Oh, no, 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 no." But it's an amazing thing that when you actually lay that question on them, they realize what they're doing.
Or not. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, it can be such a superficial thing that people don't really internalize what the subject is. When you would ask the question, "You're not trying to make me feel guilty," they're going to basically respond, "Oh, no, no, not at all." And it really could be that they were trying to make you guilty, but they answered the way they. So it's kind of hard to judge, but the idea is we're dancing with our emotions and our verbalizations around this concept of guilt, and it's got many facets. What do you think, Carlo?
Given the concept or given the statement that guilt is a figment of our imagination to control our actions, how do we adapt to the concept of learned ethics and learned guilt? Where do they juxtapose each other?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think we're going to be dealing with that for the rest of the hour. And Kathy Pop has a comment, so I'm going to be looking at that momentarily. But I wanted to follow up on this. I got some definitions off the internet, and I thought that they were really interesting. So the first one was, as I was asking, what is guilt? There was an immediate response there. You know how Google comes up with the most likely response and packages it up beautifully at the top of the search results. So this is what Google came up with. Guilt is a cognitive or an emotional experience that occurs when a person realizes or believes, accurately or not, that he or she has compromised his or her own standards of conduct or has violated a moral standard and bears significant responsibility for that violation. So it's not only finding fault, but it's also in imposing by nature some kind of punishment or some kind of additional something that says, okay, there's something here significant that you've got to pay for. In some way, shape, or form, you've got to pay. Okay, so that's on the whole concept of guilt. And as you were bringing up before, several of you, it's part of the imagination saying, I'm guilty, I owe. So this is something that we've laid upon ourselves, and yet if we hadn't thought of that day, we would feel a lot better, right? I mean, if we had never even gone there, how much better would we feel? Now, this is not to say that there are certain things that we don't want to address or cannot address as human beings, as people, as parents, or whatever the case is. If somebody does something that is undesirable, it has to be addressed in some way. So I'm not saying live and let everybody screw up the way they want to and don't address it. That's not what I'm saying. But how we respond to the situation and how we address it is really critical. And whether we use the concept of guilt or not, or how we use it, is very, very important. So anyway, the rest of that statement was, it is closely related to the concept of remorse. So that was basically the concept there. Sherry, did you have something to comment on what I just said?
Well, I was just going to ask you, for the big thing for me and what you even just said is that when you feel guilt, how does it serve? What does it actually accomplish? You know, even to me, as you said before, it doesn't serve a purpose. It's like you don't get an answer when you feel guilty. You don't clarify it because you feel guilty. You don't feel better when you feel guilty. So, you know, it's like a snowball rolling downhill.
It certainly is. And when you have guilt, when you attend to the concept of guilt, it feels like there's something that happened in the past. And by golly, you can't undo the past. It is there forever. It is permanently, indelibly written on your history and on your soul that you screwed up, right? So, my God, I'm guilty. I can't change that. I'm guilty. And so that's not an action term. Guilt is a state of being, and especially if you're thinking about what it happened a year ago, 2 years ago, a lifetime ago, whatever, you were still reliving the guilt and attenuating our present life according to that guilt. In other words, we're saying we were guilty back then, we're still guilty now. And it's basically against everything that's human, because in human reality, you can heal from a wound, you can recover, you can think differently, your life can change. So what is the point of it all? Finding guilt is only good until you figure out, oh, I guess I'm guilty of that. So where do we go from here? And so that's the whole point, and we'll progress to the concept in a little bit as far as how do you go and where do you go from the point of assigning guilt to yourself or to someone else.
Hey, Roland.
Yes.
It's just dawned upon me how this is so appropriate for modern day society, because it used to be innocent until proven guilty. You pay your price to society in the judicial system that we have, and after that you come out and it's done. You're cleansed. That does not happen nowadays. You're tracked. And the innocent until proven guilty, it's guilty by media trial more than anything nowadays, especially on the well-seen cases. So the whole social energy within guilt and punishment and the whole judicial process has changed. Our cultural conception of it has changed.
Absolutely. And the feeling that you have to, you've got this measurement of guilt, therefore a measurement of something that you owe, or that you should suffer as punishment, or you should be labeled permanently as whatever, is actually just a social thing. It has nothing to do with reality. When it comes to it, if we are all one, if we are all God and God is everything and everything, you can't get away from your divinity. So during your course of your lifetime, you've just expressed very poorly at a certain point, and maybe inappropriately according to some, and that is what you're sticking to and tagging yourself with and attaching emotions and punishment and payment according to those thoughts.
Yes.
Whereas the thoughts can be adjusted, and your goal or your movement forward from that point can be adjusted, and people should be able to leave and walk away from something and transform and transpire and change. So that's part of, the judicial system is one thing, but I've found that the personal system of people in general can be much, much more vicious than the official judicial system. No doubt the judicial system can legally take some people's lives under certain circumstances, but in the living case, we take our own lives just by self-condemnation or condemning someone else and holding them to it, keeping this negativity around. So we're going to continue on with a couple of other definitions that apply to this whole concept. When they talk about guilt, here's another definition that I came to. Guilt, a feeling of responsibility or remorse for some offense, crime, wrong, etc., whether real or imagined. Now, when you consider that, then people are out there punishing themselves or others because of something they've imagined. Because how many times have we thought something like, oh man, that's horrible what so-and-so did, and then later on you find out that it wasn't exactly what you thought it was, and you're going, ooh, I'm guilty of misjudging this person, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is you're holding this negativity on somebody when it wasn't appropriate. And it happens every day. 90% of the time we're misjudging, at least to some extent, when we try to observe people and come to the conclusion of what they're doing or what they intend. Because a lot of times what you see them doing has less to do with their intention behind what they're doing than we think it does. And that's a an open-ended statement that can apply to a lot of things. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know what's going on. It goes along with that statement. What is that one? Something about what other people think of you is none of your business.
Yeah.
Hey, Roland, there's another one I want to share.
Go ahead.
I said earlier that my background was in the marine world, and the navigation of ships is controlled by something that we know as the rules of the road, the steering and sailing regulations. And they've been cobbled together from the School of Hard Knocks and people running into one another. So there's a lot of wisdom buried in there. And the preamble to the steering and sailing rules, and I'm guessing it's still there because it was there for a century or more, says that assumptions based on scanty information are dangerous and should be avoided. And it always struck me that that was a very wise way to look at life.
Yeah, and I think that that allows for some flexibility too. I mean, it outlines some principles, but the waters of sailing change, and so there are things to watch for, but not some steadfast rules that say when you cross this line, we're going to lower the boom on it. It's basically saying, watch out for this and be careful. In the fluid nature of life, here are things to pay attention to. So I really like that analogy. Shara, did you have something?
My grandfather used to say, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. And most of our judgments are based on what we hear.
Yes.
And even on what we see, but that can be really, that can be confusing too. I mean, you can give 4 people the exact same visual and they'll all see something different. Yeah. So based on our filters. So, it really bears some, internal looking.
Yep. And I have to apologize to everybody, but as soon as you made that quote, I thought of CCR and the Heard It Through the Grapevine. So, because that's exactly what the words of the song say.
Exactly.
They believe half of what you hear and some or none of what you see or whatever.
Yeah. So
anyway, Kathy Pop made a comment regarding some things said earlier. We're guilted into doing what others want.
Yes.
And that's a huge example of what we're talking about here. That it has nothing to do necessarily with what we think. A lot of times it's what other people perceive as right or wrong, and it's what we expect them viewing us that modifies our actions and the way they feel, the way we feel, and what we do. And since when should that have anything to do with what we want to do in life? Since when?
The beginning of time. I mean, it sucks, but that's what's been happening, And
yes.
You're right. It's like there have been so many rules, guidelines, regulations, ways of being. We've all been enculturated in them. And so even when our heart says, that doesn't feel right, oh, but that's the rule, do it anyways. you know. And so that's where we guilt ourselves a lot of times, is that internally and in our own personal integrity, we're saying we don't really want to do that, you know, and yet that's the rule. You must. Or
So,
you're guilted.
Shira, you know my quote about rules.
Yeah, I do.
let's
Am
hear
I
it.
allowed to say it?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Rules are just someone else's bullshit.
Okay, I'll buy that. I'll buy that because uh, I've, I've not been a really good person to adhere to other people's rules. It's cost me a lot of jobs and a lot of relationships and stuff because I do this thing that people talk about and say often enough, but seldom do, and that is follow your heart.
Yes.
And if you use that as the overseeing air of vibration that you run your life, if you follow your heart, a lot of times you're not going to do everything that you just did or you think you're going to do in the future. It would take on a different shape. And yet we do so much, as Kathy says, because of somebody else's thoughts about us. And that's no way to run your life. So if you're doing that, it's probably costing you more lack of energy flow and more tension and more anxiousness and more negativity than you really deserve in your life. And deserving is another thing. We talked about guilt. It's like once we've assigned the concept of guilt, we tend to say, okay, well, since this happened once in my life, and yes, it was me, then I no longer deserve the same attention that a normal human being or an average person does. I'm lesser than. And it's that self-talk that is causing so many people so much negativity relative to their own view of their own self-worth that causes most of the mental issues and the physical issues in their lives.
Yes. There's also, Roland, the concept of, this goodist, so trying to be a good person. And ultimately, we're raised to believe that if if we don't follow these cultural means, if we don't be nice to others, if we don't do what they ask of us, or play the game. Which way are they wanting you to go? Then all of a sudden, we're not a good, upstanding, moral person. It's like we're using others, or we're insensitive to others, or there's all this language around it. And so for a lot of people, they're just trying to be goodish. They're just trying to be the best person they can based on what they were told. The whole time they're selling themselves out, and the internal guilt is eating them up, and they don't, a lot of times, don't even know that they're doing that to themselves because they think they're being a good person.
I think that there's a toxicity in the air about what you were just saying too, because there's being a good person and there's being your good self.
Yeah.
And when we say a good person, we've kind of like put that aside from ourselves and saying that there's a model of a person that we're trying to emulate from where we are, but we don't want to be just good, and be good in the first place, not be the good person that we think that we model according to what other people say, or follow a certain trend or trademarks that are described externally. I think that being good is one thing, and if you are being good, you're going to be less judgmental. You're going to be less negative about things. You're going to be more allowing and more accepting, more supportive, and more loving. Wow, being good is like a fun thing to do. So where do we make the change in our humanity where we have to be judgmental? And I think that it all has to do with this concept of being out of control and where all the fear comes from, because people are programmed to believe that they are victims, which I don't believe in the least. And if you want to ask me why I'm sitting in a wheelchair and I don't feel like a victim, I'll explain that to you, but that's another episode. And I'm perfectly happy where I am, but that's a complicated thing, and it's all psychology. So one other definition I wanted to add before a couple things that I got from the internet, and they dealt with the concept of shame, and I wanted to address that because I thought it was very interesting. The shame, the painful feeling arising from the consciousness of something dishonorable, improper, ridiculous, etc., done by oneself or another. Now, they're talking about feelings that arise from thoughts. So if those feelings arise from thoughts, and we know that the idea of the shame and remorse and those things are literally responsible for people's lives ending. I'm talking about sickness, conflict, uh, physical illness, and depletion of their bodily energies where something physically goes wrong, and just the thinking in the negative and being in depression, that those things can take people's lives, and it does every day. So what I'm thinking is a lot of lives could be saved by just realizing you don't have to be negative, you don't have to live in the world of punishment or self-punishment or other people's punishment, because your thinking can change and that can change your life. And the healing concept of any kind of sickness or any kind of disease or any kind of physical condition, healing is possible. I believe that people have a biological blueprint that their body is geared towards recovering from any sickness or illness or whatever and returning to that biological wholeness. And if we extrapolate that out in a spiritual sense, I believe that includes growing a new finger if you cut it off. And you know I carry it a little bit too far sometimes, but I actually believe this stuff. But in any rate, I think recovery from any infliction is possible, and it starts with the concept of thinking in the positive and knowing that it's possible. And they say that in this universe, anything's possible. Anything is possible. All things are possible.
Yes.
And here Jesus brought somebody back to life. He walked on water, turned water to wine, and did all these things. And then he said to the people, and you will do much greater things than you're witnessing me doing. Well, now, okay, there's me and then there's Jesus. And let's see, he walked on water, turned water to wine, and he brought people back to life. There's me and there's that. And there's everything in between. Well, there's a lot of stuff that I get to experience before I have to turn water to wine or bring back people back to life. That there's plenty of room for miracles here, and yet he says we will do greater things. We will do far more. So what's impossible? What in the hell is impossible if we can do those things? And if we even start to think about, was Jesus telling the truth when he said these things? Hell yes.
Henry Ford said, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, and it's as simple as that. And you know, people tell us that with their own mantras the same type of thing all the time. Like, we become what we think about, by Earl Nightingale.
Mm-hmm.
Buddha, we are what we think. All that we are arises from our thoughts. So if we start controlling our thoughts and thinking about our thoughts, what can we change in our lives? And what is this? What is the basic formula? And I insist, I'm adamant about this, that it has to do with being positive, being loving, and going that direction, pursuing joy and expressing joy, and bringing and giving joy to others. And it starts there. So when we start addressing the concept of guilt, how do we do this? Now, every one of us, even though we're talking about this, love to give, love to be positive, love to be loving, but things happen in our lives that affect us negatively. So what do you think? How do we deal with it? When it happens, well, as they say, blank happens. When it does, when the blank hits the fan, how do we deal with it?
The polite expression is guano occurs.
Okay, well, let's ride with that one. Guano occurs.
Yes. And if you don't know what guano is, people just right-click it. That's George's other thing. Okay, so ultimately, I want to address, like what you're saying, Roland, is one thing. Like stuff happens, and then we're in the midst of it, and we get caught in it. But what you were saying a few minutes ago about like changing your thought processes, to me, the real big issue here is not when stuff happens. It's the ongoing pattern that's running that we don't even know is happening. It's for us to slow down enough to become so aware when those little negative things are going around and around and around. You know, it's like when I started slowing down enough that I started becoming more conscious of my thoughts, I was like, what? You're thinking that? Where did that come from? That happened 30 years ago. Why are you thinking about that? It's like all of a sudden when I started getting aware, it was like, what is my mind doing to me? It's like these little things would come up and like reiterate themselves that had no importance to me at all, except to bring in an emotion that I didn't want in my space in that moment, a negativity of some kind. And this would be the unconscious rolling, just rolling. You know, it just happens. That's what it does. And so we have to begin to catch what are our common thoughts. What do they say? We have like 60 million thoughts a day. The problem is we have the same thoughts every day, day in, day out. It's like the same 60 million thoughts yesterday, the day before, and today. You know, it's like we've got to start catching those and bringing just a little positive aspect to each one of those. Like when we catch ourselves, go, oh, that's not where I want to be. Oh, where do I want to be? You know?
That's where the practice comes in, right? I mean, basically we have to practice what they call a intellectual or a consciousness intercept or a change of frequency. When these thoughts occur to us, immediately we have the feeling, ooh, it's a negative thought. I feel it in my body. I don't like that. So immediately we have to have a turnaround to change that vibration and look towards something positive, right?
Right. And a super, super simple tool is one of two things. First, you can't sing without opening the heart chakra. And I've found that in studies by taking prints of people when they're singing and when they're not. So if you're feeling a little stressed in any way or negative, just hum. Just hum to yourself. That's one way to shift the frequency right now. The other thing is internally, whether you mean it or not, say, I love you. I love you. Mm-hmm. I love you. You know, and it doesn't be projected at anything. You know, put your hand over your heart, say, I love you. Your frequency will begin to change immediately. You can be angry. If you can bring yourself to say, I love you, it will start to shift.
That's beautiful. And that's basically why the name of this show is What is the Positive? Because we're going to run into negatives all day. We're going to run into things that people classify as this right here. This, I got a chokehold on it. This is my problem. This is a problem too. By golly, I've got a whole bunch of problems. I'm going to put them in a bunch here. I'm going to stare at them all day. And when you've got the problem, you've got to move past the problem. You've got to rise above the problem. So you ask, what is the positive? In other words, what can you do beyond this problem that may change the problem itself? How can I counteract the negativity of the problem? How can I compensate? How can I get rid of it completely? And a lot of times what is very interesting to me is when you start speculating and really taking a good look at it without the emotional, oh my God, this is so bad thing. When you open up your consciousness and realize, let's be creative about this. Let's see, I'm really good at solving problems. What is the problem really? And you look at it and you realize, wow, oh, that's not a problem. It's not even a problem in the first place because this is this and this is that, and I just completely got that wrong, so I can let that go now. And there are things that we're clinging on to, such as worry and fear, and the type of things that they haven't happened yet, but they might, and they could happen at any time. You know, a plane could crash out of the skies and take me out. You know, if you sit there worrying about stuff like that, you're going to definitely have a miserable life because you're going to choke off your life energies and just be focused on something so narrow that you're not allowing your creative self to even exist.
Yes.
And so that's a big thing with me as far as reaching out beyond what you think is the encapsulation of yourself in fear and sickness and conflict, even poverty, anything negative. is your own thinking can evolve past that. And they say if you want to have an abundant life, you have to live abundantly. You have to feel abundant. You have to feel it inside. Well, you don't feel abundant unless you allow yourself to feel abundant. And most people say, well, how can I feel abundant when I don't have a cent in my pocket, or I've only got $5 to my name? How am I supposed to feel abundant? And the thing is that just the money measurement is only one thing. And people think about it and say, yeah, but I've got a great family with 3 lovely daughters, and they're wonderful people. I'm really wealthy when it comes to stuff like that. I have a loving wife. She's great. And just have a great relationship. I am a really wealthy man. And when you focus on those feelings, guess what? It changes the vibration about everything about you, and wealth comes to you in all forms, and that includes money. So when I'm talking to about marketing, I ask them, well, where are you coming from, and where do you want to go? What are your goals? How do you feel about money? How do you feel about service of your clients? How do you feel about upgrading the product that you're giving or your service? How do you feel about servicing the support group of what you offer to the people? And if they're not willing to do those things, I know that they're already too negative for me to work with them.
There's something else that I heard just recently, Roland, that's really powerful. When you talk about, I'm not rich, I don't have a lot of blah, 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 There was something where someone took the world and they pared it down to a ratio of 100 people. So the whole world ratioed down to just 100 people. And there was a lot of stuff within this information about how many of those would be Caucasian, how many of those would be black, how many, they were doing that sort of thing. But some of the conclusions they came to was that out of 100 people, I was like, one person would have the majority of the money on the planet. So we're paralleling how many have it now compared to how many have the smaller amounts. But some of the really beautiful things that came out of it was, if in your house anywhere you have a loose dish with change in it, or you have cash in your wallet or purse, or you have a house to live in and a meal daily, you are actually richer than 75% of the planet. I mean, those few little simple things. It's like we don't even really know how abundant we are when we look, because we don't see the whole big picture. And when we begin to focus on that piece, as you said, a loving wife, a loving friend, an animal that is totally unconditional in the way that it responds to me, whatever it is that even when it comes to the small things like money and stuff, especially those of us in the United States, are so much more abundant than we realize compared to the rest of the planet. And just to begin to hone that is huge.
And you draw another picture in my mind that I have to mention cats, because we have cats. They don't care how much money you make. They don't care the color of the walls in their house. They're concerned with the regularity of the food and the water in their bowls, and the fact that they can curl up on your lap, whether you've got an expensive pair of pants on and a nice shirt, or a t-shirt and shorts, and they want to curl up on your lap, and they'll purr if you pet them. And the total acceptance of something like that. How much purring do humans do? Well, it's usually conditional and contingent upon, well, do I like you or not? Do I like you today?
Depends how much stroking we get.
Well, let's not get into that exactly as a concept, but yes, you are absolutely right. Kathy Pop always makes very astute comments here. I'm going to display a couple of them. It says, maybe I should have said that I have never hidden the broom closet and don't think I ever will. That's a good sign. And she also says, Jesus believed we are all the same, and that was really my point of what I said earlier. He didn't separate himself from us. We shouldn't separate ourselves from him or from the rest of the world. And she says, I know I'm tougher on myself than anybody else could ever be. I forgive people easily. A few years ago, it dawned on me that I have not forgiven myself. And this is what I'm getting at. We are best at punishing ourselves.
There's another really super simple rule. It's like no matter what you're looking at that you think is so wrong, that you are guilty about, that it was horrible, whether it was today or 50 years ago, um, lose the judgment. Lose the judgment. Look at it as if this were not right or wrong, if it just is, it's just happening, then how else can I view it? Because to me, this is how we make our past our wisdom, is that we'll take those things that occurred back then and we go inside and we begin to self-assess that, nobody does anything wrong in the world given their perspective. So that's the truth of it.
Yes, yes.
And so if we understand that in that time in our life we did the best we could, that's all we had. So now we're just going to do it without judgment and be grateful for the experience and then ask, how do I use this information now? What would I do differently?
There you go. And I love your description because to support your point, in some cultures, in some societies, even today, cannibalism is a way of life and accepted as the way things are. And you're to be honored if you're worthy of being eaten, So, so let's say, okay, we don't have to agree with that, but it's exemplary of how different cultures are and how right and wrong are. It's a very, very weird subject, to say the least. So the concept of guilt implies judgment. It says, well, in order to be right and wrong, we have to have somebody that knows right and wrong and lowers the boom and defines, was he right or was he wrong, and what does he deserve as a punishment for what he did? And the whole concept of guilt brings on that whole conversation. Now, what if we adjust our thinking completely here a bit? And instead of saying, well, something's got to be right and wrong, something has to be judged upon, we have to find fault in things in order to be guilty of it. So what if we just said, there is no right and wrong, just differences and different choices. Now, what's right for me might not be right for you. What's wrong for me might not be wrong for you. However, for my own choices, this is what I decided to do. And I have this experience. I have this negative experience that says, wow, this is going to cost me money, this is going to cost me emotion, this is going to hurt my feelings, it's going to damage a relationship I have, whatever it is that we're thinking is going to hurt me, and say, okay, what is the positive? What do I do about it? How can I turn this around? Where do I go from here? And immediately go for the positive aspect of what you can do given the circumstance. Because no matter how bad whatever circumstance strikes you, you're not standing still. You don't have to take it and accept it as punishment and do absolutely nothing. You can do something. So what is the turnaround? What's the quickest turnaround for when things happen to you in your life that are undesirable?
Yes. Well, and also, Roland, for a lot of people, when they look at that picture that you're laying out there, for them to address somebody in their world and change the way they've always been, it's scary because those people expect them to act a certain way, and they expect certain things out of them. So one of the things that I learned that's really, really helpful for like my clients and students is, you want to bring your integrity, and you know that it's going to be like a brick through the window because they've never seen that from you before, and like this is going to this all of a sudden you're going to look like you're walking on water and they're all going to run for fear, what's she doing? And so ultimately I will preface it. I will say, I want to tell you something, and you're probably not going to agree with this. You may not, or this might even rub you the wrong way. Or this might even sound really bad to you. So I'll kind of prepare them, but this is my truth, and so I'm going to bring it to you. And then I'll say what I need to say, and when a person is forewarned, then it's almost as though they can hear you. They don't have to agree with you, and that's the other thing, is that you have to be in a place of honoring that they're not going to agree with you, that they're not going to like what you have to say, that they're not going to be okay with it, you know. So I can honor that you don't like this. I'm good with that. I don't need you to like it. And so there's a big adjustments in a lot of different areas for us when we really start to be true to what we believe and feel and think. And it's not oftentimes easy for the people, you know, who know us. Strangers, you
Yes.
can get away with it. You know, but people who know you, it can really can turn the world upside down for all of you.
Yeah, so and it brings to mind, as you were speaking of this concept, that something that I learned when I was 15 years old, and I told myself I'm going to use this as one of the premises upon which I base my life, and that is that everything changes, nothing stays the same. So if that's the case, I would base my life more in a better sense if I gear myself towards the concept of change. And so in doing so, it allows me the thought that, yes, this is something that I've discovered today, right here and now, that I don't like and that I would avoid at all costs if I was given the option. Well, where do I go from here? So the idea is you always have a choice right now. You can describe the past or you can describe what you think is, but how are you going to move past it? So if I'm working along with someone else, I would bring it up as basically, well, this is what we're dealing with right now. How are we going to get past this? How are we going to move on? And be a person that solves problems. Be the solution bringer. Be the creative person that is not trapped into the box of hate and blame and guilt and all those things, because those are concepts that will box you in and put you in your grave if you let them. And I believe that life is so far beyond that, because life is not stagnant. You couldn't stop if you wanted to until your breath is gone, and then you don't stop from there, believe it or not.
The
So
breath never dies.
yeah, exactly. And some of the things that they say when they're talking about um, functionally, what do you do? And how to increase positive thinking. They talk about meditation, they talk about writing, and they talk about play. And I like these things because meditation is, number one, you're calming yourself, thinking about a solo concept, a point in space, whatever it is, but you limit it down. But what the limiting down in meditation does is it takes everything that you're thinking negatively and puts it on the shelf, at least for a little while. So basically, you're giving your spirit a break for a while, and you're giving your physical body a break from all this negative charge. And it allows you to take that charge and be positive for a little while, or at least neutral. But when you meditate down to the one point, or the focused thought, it allows you to extend and expand out from that point in creativity. And that's the real you that's underneath all that baggage and bullshit that we're laminating upon ourselves, housed in the concept of guilt, blame, anger, fear, etc.
All those emotional responses stem from a need to be validated. And so one of the first things that people need to be able to embrace, and that, you know, I always put this out to people because we are so hungry to be validated culturally. You know, it's like we're always trying to do something to be validated. We've got to lose the need to be validated. That the true validation comes from within. We just have to know ourselves and know that we're on track. And what everybody else thinks is totally unimportant. I have a saying that I live by: I'm independent of the good opinion of others. Don't need that. You know, they can believe and think whatever they want, and I'm good with that. I honor that in them, but I don't have to agree with that.
I like that tremendously. It's basically you're not needy. You don't need someone else to approve of you in order for you to move onward and to enjoy life and be perfectly whole. Uh, in and of yourself, you don't need that approval of others. And other people are feeling like, well, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I'm unfulfilled, I'm this and that, and they can basically describe how they can be needy if they choose to be, but that's all playing with the emotion of what they are. And none of those things are necessary. If you're alone or feeling lonely, that simply does not have to be. You might feel like, God, I'm the only one in my world that cares about me, and I'm having a bit of a problem caring about myself as it is, and they feel like that alone. That is a figment of the imagination, and that is the story that you're telling yourself. So that's something maybe more easily cured than a physical condition, but it's just as deadly, it's just as important, and just as ominous as a cut on your arm or a broken leg. It's just as vital a thing to address as those things.
That's the other cultural teachings. What you just described is what people are taught they're supposed to feel. And so they don't know any better until they start getting the information from some people who have, gotten clear of some of those teachings, is that they think they're supposed to have a partner to be whole. I mean, I remember that as a young adult. Oh my God, you don't have a husband? What's wrong with you? It's like, that's how they look at you. It's like if you don't have a partner or a lover, my God, you must be really screwed up, sister. And so
Yeah, right.
We've got to get past all those teachings. We have to begin to think for ourselves. And that's a hard one for people because we're so trained that we think the training is real. And so we have to begin to look at the rules and really decide, wait a minute, does that one really work for me? Because I didn't make that one up. Somebody else did. Do I want to claim that or do I want to make up a new one?
Yeah, human beings never came with a sell-by date.
Yeah. And people don't even know. They don't know that they have the right to make up their own rules about whether they want to be alone, whether they want to be together, whether they want to have partners, not partners, whether they want to have quiet time or crowd time. They don't even know that they get to choose. They're just following blindly.
And I like that very much. And I was just going to follow up on these two things, and then we're almost ready to wrap up our hour. But we talked about the couple of the things that they suggest were how to increase positive thinking, and one of them was writing. And we all know that writing is a great expression of the inner self, and a very good tapping into the creative self. And so writing is a good idea. They also say when you write down your wishes and things, you start to manifest them because you've created a thought that becomes more real than just this rambling thought in your mind. So I definitely believe in writing. Writing down intentions and goals and those things is a great thing. But the third factor was play. Play is wonderful when you release the binds of I shoulda, woulda, coulda, I can't, I shouldn't have, and so forth, and you just play. You're in the midst of your expression. And that's discovering a different element of yourself that's more flowing and expressive, and you're going to be able to heal yourself, along with laughter and fun and smiles, giving love. And we could even take this a step further if in the healing concept, when you talk about the concept of, if you've heard of this before, and I know you have, Shira, Ho'oponopono, they have a healing concept regarding, it's a Hawaiian concept, started with this doctor in Hawaii, and he healed himself and healed people with this basic fundamental philosophy and a strategy and a tactic that followed four principles, and it was looking at yourself, looking at your system, your things going on, and applying four principles. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you. Now, one of the things that strikes me about those four things is that, Shira, your mantra is thank you and I love you. And it basically says, I don't have to be sorry and I don't have to ask for your forgiveness. I'm going to move on to thank you and I love you. And I think that that's going to heal a lot of things. And I think that if we apply that to ourselves, we're going to be able to heal a lot faster, be more accepting, and not hold on to things like guilt.
We need to do a whole session on how do you say thank you about something that you think is bad.
That's a good one. And so for future reference, we will definitely go there. Kathy Pop made some comments again, and I will definitely play them for you right now. So she's, green
Thank
room
you.
worthy, basically.
Oh, yeah. Go, Kathy.
Saying here, Kathy, in my early 20s, I hung around millionaires. They were some of the most unhappy and lonely for some people I have ever known. Okay, there's that one sentence, and proving that money has nothing to do with it, right? The next one was, no matter what the circumstances may be, it's how you feel. It's that feeling that determines in what direction you can go or you go to. You can decide on what kind of change you will make going forward. It's always a
Cool.
decision. It's always a choice. And then the last thing she wrote here was, several years ago I was homeless, and so many could not understand why I was not angry and depressed. I really like this post here.
Mm.
I told them that those emotions will do nothing to improve my situation, so why not focus on what was going well? I still had so much to be grateful for even then. So when they talk about the concept of gratitude, all the law of attraction websites and the people are saying, attitude of gratitude, be grateful. And it's a perfect example is when people don't have anything to be grateful for, that is a figment of their imagination. They can always find something to be grateful for. That's exactly what learning how to be positive. So I think that we've encompassed the concept enough. I hope that people have been joining us in the thought process of how that guilt is something that we don't have to use and we don't have to accept and don't have to live with. We can use it as a turning point for the next move that is indeed positive. So thank you very much to Carlo, George, and Shira for joining me on this conversation. And I hope some people got some benefit out of this. I hope that you're making the choice as a result of this that you can be more positive and can be more accepting and certainly not have anything to do with guilt past the point of 1 second. It can be gone. So guilt be gone. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And we are saying goodbye now from What is the Positive?